Well, this was meant to be the date we will celebrate, and that we will celebrate also by this piece of legislation to protect the women better in Europe against violence. But we are in thoughts with Ukrainian women, and I am afraid they do not want to celebrate. They want to survive. They want their families to survive. And many of them want to fight. So maybe instead of celebratory tone, we should present in a sober way the directive against violence against women and domestic violence, which I think has been awaited for a long time, because I remember myself explaining in this House several years, being the Equality Commissioner, that we have to rely on the Istanbul Convention, that we do not need the European legislation. And Istanbul Convention was not ratified, or has not been ratified by all the member states. That's why we are coming with this piece of legislation. But at the same time, contrary or compared with the Istanbul Convention, this is much more modern piece of legislation, and especially in the part which is addressing or reacting on the new threats of cyber violence. This is, I think, important that we are proposing that. Last sentence on Ukraine. If you want to cover the topic of women, I would recommend you, who didn't listen to Oksana Zabushka today and her testimony in the Parliament, to do it, to listen to her, and maybe by listening to this authentic, shocking and touching testimony, we can understand better, a little bit better, on what's going on. And she had one plea: do not call it Ukrainian war, because this is European war. And I think that you were listening, to my colleagues, speaking about the European reaction on this war, which, of course, has to, we all need to do our work. So coming back to the directive, we adopted the proposal of the directive to prevent and combat violence against women and domestic violence. Violence against women is still prevailing across the EU, and domestic violence increased enormously during the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me put the record straight. Violence against women is estimated to affect 1 in 3 women in the EU. 1 in 2 have experienced sexual harassment. 1 in 20 women report having been raped. Report doesn't mean that this is reality, because we have underreporting of this horrible crime. Online violence is on the rise, targeting in particular women in public life, such as journalists and politicians, but also, of course, women in general. And there must be no impunity online. I don't see any reason why not to punish those who are attacking women online, and this is what we want to stop. About a third of women in the EU have faced sexual harassment at work. Basically, how I see it, probably almost every woman or girl in the EU has experienced, or at least witnessed, some form of gender-based violence, ranging from more minor, such as harassment, to the more serious crimes. And this is not acceptable in modern Europe, and this is why we have to act. This is why we decided to act and introduce EU-wide legal instrument addressing violence against women in the most comprehensive way. Today's new rules tackle violence against women from all angles, and my colleague Helena Dalli will explain all the elements in detail. Let me just briefly highlight the gist of the proposal. The proposal builds on existing national and international rules and enables member states to go further beyond these standards. The directive criminalises certain forms of violence that mainly affect women. It offers a comprehensive approach and addresses the rights and protection of victims in proceedings, as well as individual support for victims, including shelters and helplines. This will help tackling an important barrier in addressing the issue. And we want to deal with the issue of violence against women effectively, and especially by the protection of victims, we want to increase the rate or the appearance of reporting of these crimes, because, as I said, the under-reporting is the issue. It is a criminal law instrument that criminalises at EU level rape on the basis of a lack of consent, punishable for a minimum of 8 years, female genital mutilation, punishable for at least up to 5 years or of imprisonment, cyber violence, including non-consensual sharing of intimate images, cyber stalking and cyber harassment, and cyber incitement to violence or hatred. I have no doubt we must update our legal codes to capture these digital crimes. Our proposal plugs into the Digital Services Act. It clarifies what is illegal online and gives clear guidance to online platforms. I expect that this legislation will be an additional incentive for online platforms to address cyber violence against women and girls, while addressing other aspects like access to justice for victims, specialised support for them, prevention and coordination among member states. Victims would also have the right to claim full compensation from offenders for damages, including the costs of healthcare, support services or lost income. Thank you very much for your attention, and now I would like to ask Helena to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Vera. And as you rightly point out, this has been a long-awaited piece of legislation. But I think that it is timely, especially in the current circumstances where we are seeing in neighbouring Ukraine, where rape is being used as a weapon of war again. You know, it's very much in this context that we are saying also that this is not something that we are celebrating today, although it is Women's Day, but something which is very concerning obviously to us all. And violence did take a new meaning following the invasion of Ukraine, where we see women and men alike demonstrating bravery in the face of military violence, protecting their children and being forced to flee. So women and children in these situations of armed conflict are often vulnerable to exploitation. So we must not allow them to become prey for sexual violence or other abuses, including trafficking and rape. So freedom from sexist violence is a precondition for women to be able to achieve equality in the different areas of life. So all women know the fear of violence. We assess risk. We make safety considerations, such as when, for instance, returning home alone at night. So the prevalence of violence in our societies makes us do this. So this is a discriminatory burden against us that must be socially acknowledged and acted upon. And we know that violence can be exacerbated when we are subjected to intersecting forms of discrimination, as is often the case for LGBTIQ women, for women with disabilities, for women with a minority racial or ethnic background. Women are not a homogeneous group. So that is why it is important to take this intersectional approach. So today we are adopting a legislative proposal that addresses violence against women and domestic violence, and countless cases of violence against women remain unreported. So logically, if they are unreported, then they are not addressed. According to a 2021 FRA survey, victims only reported partner violence to the police in 22% of cases. So our proposal introduces new ways to report crimes that is sensitive to victims' vulnerability. And we invite member states to implement a one-stop shop approach so that following the reporting of a crime, women are put on a track to receive all the necessary care and advice they need about the judicial process, psychological and medical support, as well as emergency housing. So victims of cyber violence must receive support on how to get online content removed. Upon the adoption of this proposal, authorities must conduct individual risk assessments during the first contact with the victim to assess the risk posed by the offender. Where needed, authorities would provide immediate protection through emergency, barring or protection orders. And one of the obstacles in tackling violence against women is that we still do not consider it as a societal problem. So we want to invite member states to organise awareness-raising campaigns on victims' rights, including on protection, support and access to justice. Men and boys can be and must be strong allies in this. So to ensure that we treat victims in a gender and trauma-sensitive manner, the proposal introduces mandatory and targeted training for professionals who enter in contact with victims. If women fall victim, they need the appropriate support. So to address the specificities of sexual violence, the Commission's proposal requires that member states provide sufficiently dedicated and specialised services for victims of sexual violence, including rape. We must make specialised shelters available to victims to ensure their return to independent living following their extraction from a violent environment. In addition, member states should put in place national helplines to support victims of violence against women and domestic violence to be available round the clock. We also must ensure an EU-wide number. We have an EU-wide number that can be called from anywhere in the EU, which will direct victims to the relevant national helpline. We will clarify the definition of rape, recognising it for what it is, a penetrative sexual act without consent. We will also provide for criminalisation of female genital mutilation, the non-consensual sharing of intimate images and other forms of cyber violence. So to monitor progress and the reality of violence, the Commission is proposing a common member states data collection mechanism based on a common methodology to feed into an EU-wide survey every 5 years. Member States will be also obliged to ensure a good cooperation with the non-governmental organisation providing for assistance to victims of violence against women and domestic violence. So today's proposal is a good step towards an all-encompassing EU-side standard that combats violence against women and responds to the specific needs of its victims. So the launch today on the 8th of March on International Women's Day is not, as you rightly pointed out, is not a gift to women, but it is a baseline that we owe to women and girls and family members. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, Vice President. So let me see if there are questions on the proposal. Looking first in the room. Yes, please go ahead.
Hello, this is Aline Flor from Público, Portugal. We may compare a little with what is already foreseen in the Istanbul Convention that is already assigned by many of European countries. What is the budget that what do you see could be enforced, like for the countries to then apply? But then, in case of specialized support, if you have more specific things to tell us about, like for example, rape crisis centers is something that is foreseen in the Istanbul Convention. Will it be like kind of the same thing that we can expect from this directive or from the talkings from now? What is the budget?
The budget.
How would we do that if sometimes it's the
Yes. Of course, yes. But if you are obliged to put certain operations in place, you are obliged to have a budget for it as well. With regards to the difference with the Istanbul Convention, I want to say here and thank the Council of Europe because the Istanbul Convention is the gold standard. But that was 10 years ago that the Istanbul Convention came into force. It's a very, very good piece of legislation, but we did not get the ratification of all the member states, as you know. Where it is slightly different, as the Vice President pointed out, our legislation is slightly more modern because the situation of cyber violence is not what it was 10 years ago. So this is being addressed here.
Yeah, if I may add, I do like practical questions. It is the ambition to decrease, importantly, so important what I am saying and it's so hard. The ambition of this directive, of course, is high to increase or decrease the number of the victims and to increase the effort of the member state, who is the master of the criminal proceedings. So we want the member states to do more. Here there is no special funding, but at the same time, of course, Helena has some available funding in the European budget to help the member states, for instance, to establish the shelters or maybe to, I don't know, organize some campaign. We did the campaign several years ago. It was the year against violence against women, because I was desperate. I didn't have legislation and I wanted to do something big. And so we had that year, and there was a very good agreement with the member states on co-financing of the awareness-raising campaign. The member states did their work, their part, addressing their society, knowing the problems, country-specific problems, and the EU was contributing. So I cannot exclude that we will not do something like that. I guess there will be a good discussion with the member states, encouraged by this piece of legislation.
Thank you very much. We're unfortunately a bit short on time as it's already late, but I'll take one last question, if that's okay, from David Carretta online.
Thank you very much. David Carretta, Radio Radicale, Italian Radio. Two questions. The first one is on another type of violence against women. The violence by some member states, I think Poland, for example, who has banned abortion, inflicting quite some damages and sometimes the death of women. I'm wondering if you are planning to do something on that issue too. And the second question is about another topic. It's for Vice President Jourova. According to the Irish Times, the UN, the United Nations, has banned its staff from using the words war or invasion to refer to what is happening in Ukraine, because it want to qualify it as operation or conflict. Do you think that it's acceptable, this advice or this order by the UN to its staff? Thank you.
The United Nations ordered this to their staff not to use the words war or...
Yes.
United Nations?
Yeah.
If it is so, then I would say it is unacceptable. I think that in this time especially, we have to use the proper names for the things which we see and which are evidenced. So I don't know, I just react now like that because I didn't see this, but anywhere written that the United Nations gave such instructions. But of course this is unacceptable, and we have to say it 100,000 times that it is unacceptable in Russia, that Russia now and Russian people live in the dark era. And Mr. President Putin wants the people to be blind and deaf, and they do not have any access to objective information because they chased the journalists out of the country because they are threatening everybody who will use the words of war or invasion with 15 years of imprisonment. So this is absolutely unacceptable. And we have to find the ways to get to the ears and eyes of the Russian people, because I don't believe that that all of them want to stay in the dark era. I remember when I was a girl, we were listening silently every evening, the Voice of America and the Radio Freedom Europe, and this was the source of objective information, and we have to invent the channels how to get there and how to bring the truth to Russia, because the society now is under incredibly strong massage, and the banning of using some words is the smallest thing. The whole system is incredible. So, on Polish abortion.
Yes, of course, we are following what is happening, not only in Poland, but in all member states. And, of course, it is unacceptable that we see a backlash and a reduction in women's rights. So it is important that we are vigilant on these situations. But as you understand also, there are areas which are member state competence, and I think that is the legislation which you are referring to.
Thank you very much for joining us for the press conference. Thank you, Vice President, Commissioner. Have a good rest of the afternoon or evening.